Okay. Good. So I think I know everyone. I'm on the CEPD. I'm Linda Laird, and I'm the head of our Sea Level Rise work. Then we have Commissioner Pyle.
Here.
Commissioner Walter here.
Good afternoon.
And let's sort of work our way through the rest. Well, and then there's Daniel and James, who are CEPD staff. And then if the rest of you could introduce yourselves, that would be grand. David.
Dr. Samantha Danchuk with Aptum.
Oh, okay, with Aptum.
Yeah, I'm David Mintz with the Captiva Community Panel.
Okay. Joel.
I'm sorry, this is Michael Antonelli with Brazaga.
Okay, Michael, welcome.
Joel Cowad, the City of Sanibel's Natural Resource Department.
Okay, very good. And Sandy's listening as an intent. She's listening. Okay, Sandy Stillwell Youngquist. So okay. Anybody else? Anywhere? We got everybody. Okay. So what I would want to be calling this is the sea level.
Linda, is Cheryl on?
No, Cheryl's not on. She can't make it today, but she will be involved. Okay.
Okay. And could you just remind everyone that this is a workshop session for the commissioners and no votes will be taken on any matter?
Okay. So everyone is there herein reminded, okay? No votes on anything. And we're calling this a workshop with an advisory panel of a variety of people that are interested and can contribute to this subject for Captiva. All right, what we want to talk first about is the vulnerability assessment. We've heard different things. We've compared deliverables, and what it is seeming to me is that that Brazaga can deliver a vulnerability assessment to us, which will be adequate or for being able to turn in later proposals to the government. So such that we will have now the sufficient vulnerability assessment, and that you can do it by, I think it was either June 1st or July 1st. Is that correct? And that would be to Michael.
Yes, that's right. The vulnerability assessment we're working on will be fully compliant with the with state statute, and we're anticipating delivery by mid-June.
Mid-June now. Okay. Now, Samantha, you guys had a proposal to be able to do one as well. Well, yours was our original one we were looking at, but now that we have found that we can get a fully compliant one, do you have any good reason why we should do a second one and have you do it, or could we just go ahead and use the Brazaga one?
Well, I guess, thank you for the opportunity to clarify. I am a little surprised because I thought we received approval at the last district meeting. We were able to see the first two tasks of the Brazaga proposal. And I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is that, I guess, the initial objectives that were assigned to each of us were different, right? So if you find that they are completing the work that you would like completed, then I guess reverse your approval and move forward with them. But we have been working with you to prepare the proposal that you were requested with all the tasks. So it's a little, I guess I'm just surprised. So if this is what's happening, that's fully up to you. And if they're clear on the scope that you want delivered, then, we can complete whatever work you would like completed. We just would need to understand the objectives. So I just want to clarify. So in summary, we will, can I assume that we're not going to receive a notice to proceed on the work that was approved for the
Well,
phase
what I
one?
wanted to do was clarify here today. I mean, what we have is a variety of moving parts, and we've been working to try to rationalize those parts. And if it became clear in, I think, one of our previous meetings or something, that if Brazzaga is really going to be delivering this and it is going to be fully compliant, it didn't make sense for us to spend the monies to have Aptum do the same thing to deliver fully compliant. And so I wanted to clarify, is that all correct? And if so, I don't think you will be receiving a notice to proceed on it because it doesn't make sense from Captiva's perspective. These are all moving parts, We're meeting with Brazzaga, trying to clarify exactly what they're doing. We're meeting with different people. And so we're just trying to rationalize this and therefore do what's best for Captiva.
If I could interject, Linda, for a second. Dr. Danchuk, first of all, our apologies if this is a surprise.
Right.
We did in the last panel meeting, you're absolutely right. We did vote to move forward. And then subsequently, right after that panel meeting, there was some conversation with the administrators and said, listen, we probably need to make sure that there's not any duplicity here because why would we spend taxpayer dollars twice? And that's kind of like where we circled back to. So I don't think any final decisions have been made, but that's where we are today. I guess, we owe you an apology. That's a surprise to you.
Me too. I thought that, well, Jennifer's been ill. I thought Jennifer would have talked to you all. So my apologies as well. And obviously we cannot make any final decision here because we have to wait to vote. But I wanted to get it clarified that this is what makes best sense for spending taxpayer money and for Captiva.
I want to mention, Linda, too, that it was under my understanding in our last meeting that we had assigned this task to Aptum. And I thought there was some discussion about Aptum should be working with Brazzaga so that they don't repeat things, but that that Aptum was going to be the source of the
Right.
of this information.
Yeah, and it was subject to a final review by me and by Jennifer because we hadn't reviewed that. And yes, that was what was going to go on. But what we found out is we would be getting basically the same product, Dick, and they're going to do it. Brazzaga is going to be doing it anyway. That's what we found last week. And so between, I think, Bob and myself, we couldn't figure out why we should spend the money. And I wanted to discuss that here today because I don't think we should be spending the $40,000 or $50,000 for the vulnerability assessment if we can get one for free. Dick, are you there?
Yeah, I am. And as I mentioned, I was just surprised that I thought we had voted to go ahead and spend the $45,000 with Aptum.
Yes, we had.
And that we would attempt to have Brazzaga and Aptum work together. And if Aptum wanted to adjust how much they're going to charge, because part of that work is being paid for through Brazzaga, that was okay with me. But the idea, I like the idea of having Aptum be the main source of professional knowledge.
Okay.
Obviously, we can't do anything today because it's not a regular meeting, but
Right.
It seems to me, are we going to have another discussion at the next board meeting to change again what
Yes.
what the group's going to do.
Yes.
Yeah, this is very disturbing. You know, we pass it, we pass a resolution to do certain things, and then we change our minds and we don't inform the professionals that are supposed to be helping us with all of these issues.
Could I say something, Linda? I think the first question that goes both to Michael Antonelli and to Samantha Danchuk is the scope of work for both vulnerability assessments that each one is intending or had intended to do, are they identical? Or are there different deliverables in each of their scopes? And I don't know if that was fully clarified. I had the sense that Samantha thought there was more that she was doing in her vulnerability assessment than I think she believed that that Brazaga was doing, but I don't know if that's true. So maybe if Samantha and Michael can just clarify if in fact they're doing the identical piece of work for the community. And if they are doing the identical piece of work, and we want to have one vulnerability assessment, and maybe there is some way they can divide the responsibilities for that work that's being done. I just don't know. But it seems to me we have two very highly skilled professionals working on a vulnerability assessment for Captiva. And I think it behooves us to know whether or not, for example, the Brazaga one is focusing primarily, or maybe only, or to some degree primarily, on South Seas, whereas the Apton proposal may have had a broader range covering the whole island. I don't know that. I had the sense from listening to Brazaga at the last meeting that they were doing the whole island. And so I guess the first question is the Apton scope identical to the Brazaga scope? And if it isn't, where are the differences? And that would help inform Dick Pyle as to whether or not there should be two different assessments being made. But if they are identical, is there some way which they can share that work so that we get a product with both of them working together on it? Or what is their recommendation to the community with respect to this issue, since we just happen to be lucky enough to have two highly skilled professionals looking to do the same or very similar things?
Oh, I'll just start. It's not appropriate to ask two consultants. You either provide kind of what scope you would want us to complete, and we can confirm for you that we have the qualifications and the means and suggest an approach for you. And then you can compare us, based on either the approach, but we kind of have to start with the same premise. So we have not had that. I have developed a scope based on the meetings that I've attended with you and the tasks that you had hoped we would address. That remains what's in our proposal. The first task was a vulnerability assessment that was compliant with the state regulations. We tried to explicitly state what we would be looking at as far as sea level rise, the specific projections, and the sectors of the infrastructure that would be evaluated. We have additional tasks included in that proposal based on other requests from you. It's really not appropriate for me to evaluate the robustness of another consultant's proposal. So I don't know what South Seas requested from Brazaga. I have seen the data collection and the vulnerability tasks that they have. They have listed some threats that they are going to evaluate, which we all saw on that presentation initially. It doesn't speak to the infrastructure sectors, but if you're saying today that they're going to make it compliant with the state requirements, then that's what they're going to do. So our approach is different. It sounds like they will do what their approach is. And we have been clear about how we would approach it using the model results that are already available and trying to summarize data that's already been accepted and adopted. So I think our approaches are probably different, but if the goal is to have a state compliant vulnerability assessment, either one of us could deliver that. But this is not an appropriate position. So, you know, Michael, I caution you as well.
No, I don't have anything to add. I think Samantha summed it up pretty well.
Okay.
Linda, this raises that same old question. Why are we doing things and then changing? It's just befuddling to me, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, who's getting their hands dirty in looking at all this stuff.
Well, here's, from my point of view, we went to interview. We wanted to understand what Brazaga was doing, and we met with them, and it sounded to me that they were going to deliver earlier the same thing that Aptum was going to deliver with respect to the vulnerability assessment. So I did not understand how I could, from a Captiva citizen and servant point of view, pay for one where we're going to get another one for free. I didn't understand why that made sense. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it today, because we've had new information come through. And so we may have made a decision, but we have had new information. Now we can go ahead and spend for the vulnerability assessment part, it's about $45,000. We can go ahead and spend that if we want to, but I don't think it's going to get us anywhere better than what we would get without spending it. So I can't see how it's logical and responsible to recommend that at this point in time, or any time. It just doesn't make sense to me. And yes, I know we agreed to it, and I was part of the agreement. And I thought that's what we were going to do, but there was new information that came through, and we have not given them the notice to proceed. So to me, it seems like it doesn't make sense.
I can add a little clarity.
What is the new
Dick,
information that we had that came after our vote?
Let me try to add some clarity. First of all, I don't think we can change anything without going back to the board and have a full vote because we voted on it. So I don't think any decisions have been made at this point to change. After our board meeting and we voted on it, and I voted on it, you know, I sat at my desk and I'm like, you know, we got to make sure that we're not have duplicity here. One, double the efforts. Two, why would we spend taxpayer dollars? I reached out to Jennifer, the administration, and said, I think, and this is 3 hours after our board call, and I said, I suggest it's prudent that we pause for a second and we make sure there isn't a duplicity of efforts here. And if we want to continue, if there is, and we want to continue, great. But I would ask that you reach out to everyone else and get their input on it. Apparently that didn't happen. Apparently she reached out to Linda after my conversation with Jennifer. I've not had any conversations with anyone else. I didn't know any decisions were made. My last conversation with Jennifer was that she was seeking the scope of work from the updated scope of work from Brazaga to compare the two. And then today we're here for this. So I assume that happened. I don't know. So I don't know if that muddies it more or adds a little clarity, but that's where my involvement came in.
I'd just like to add a summarization of the meeting that I sat in with Brazaga, Aptum, Jennifer, and Dr. Danchuk. Was that I came away with the understanding that both entities are performing a fully compliant vulnerability study of the island, but that Brazaga was very clear that we will not rank the asset levels on behalf of the district. We need to work with Aptum to prioritize for implementation, which will come into play with the funding avenue of it. And that there's currently a duplication of efforts a bit in creating the maps, but it came across, Nicole explained that it was because commissioners are wanting specific scenarios involved in their maps, so they're customized maps slightly. I know that both entities kind of, requested info, so they're operating off of the same database, so that it's comparable. And that Aptum will also focus on the legislative piece for the CEPD to determine our authority. That was my understanding from Tuesday's meeting of last week, so.
And that was a separate task, which the legislative authority, that was, we're not talking about that task. So, okay, so it appears that, thank you, Daniel. It appears that what we need to do is go back and at the next meeting, talk to all the commissioners and see what they want to do. Anybody disagree with that conclusion?
I think what Bob Walter said was enlightening. If he is correct, then and Jennifer had the scope that Brazaga was going to undertake and compare it to the scope that Aptum was going to undertake, that means that CEPD has actually a copy of the scope that Brazaga is going to be following through on. Nobody's seen that. At least I haven't seen it. I don't know.
I haven't seen it. No.
So I think if the scope that and the request that South Seas has made to Brazaga is if we can review it, then at least the CPD could determine whether we're dealing with identical scopes. I understand that Aptum has adjusted their scope in terms of the vulnerability study assessment, not only to give us a compliant one, but to give us one that would be helpful to the community to understand the vulnerabilities and to have some mapping that would help the community to understand those vulnerabilities. And that may be something beyond what Brazaga is doing. So I don't know that. And that is definitely in the scope of Aptum. So I think Linda, if you can get a hold of the Brazaga scope, that would at least help. Maybe Daniel has it, his hand is up. Maybe that would help to clarify this question for Dick, because in fact, if they're two different scopes, then it makes sense to have two different studies. But I don't think there's a way we can know that now. At least I don't know it.
Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Hang on a second.
James is putting I don't know if this is the right venue to review these.
Yeah, I don't
James
know if it is either. Should we be doing this in front of the entire board since it was voted on by the entire board?
I think what we should do is ask the staff to compare them and present to us the differences in it. Does that sound reasonable to everyone else?
Sounds reasonable to me.
I think that's the least we should do.
I agree.
Okay.
That was the intent to begin with.
Hopefully. And that's what I was trying to understand today. Okay, so going forward, what we've got is we will do that for our next meeting. All right? For our next regularly scheduled CEP.
What, Linda, what is that?
That is, we are going to ask the staff to compare the statements of work from Brazaga and Aptum and to understand the differences, present that to the CEPD commissioners so that we can look at it and make an informed decision. How's that?
Thank you.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. Dick, it was a good question. Don't get me wrong there at all. Okay. So that's that item. Moving along to project management. What I wanted to do is run this more like what I'm used to in terms of project meetings. So I'm asking the staff to have major milestones, action items, and we get the action items present to make sure that we're covering all the action items on an ongoing basis and include minutes. Okay, that's all that is. Potential grant projects. My understanding, everyone, is that although we have legislation that is enabling us to get grants for CEPD, we cannot get any planning grants. We can only get implementation grants. This, Jennifer said this was a surprise to her as well. So the fact, so in terms of what we need to do on grant projects, we've got to, anyway, we've got to figure that one out. That was more news to the other commissioners. Any other comments on that? And then finally, tidal gauge update. There's going to be a meeting tomorrow. We have a tidal gauge. I don't know if all the commissioners and everyone's aware of it. We have a tidal gauge in Sunset Captiva that predicts and tracks what the tides should be. We're in a research project on this. It will be in the, and Sanibel's doing the same thing. We're working on a joint press release on this. It's going to be having thresholds, which are major and minor thresholds that can send out alerts to the community or to whomever we care to do that, whoever wants the alerts. John Jensen is going to be meeting with the researchers tomorrow to set up the levels of what's critical and what's major, what's minor, and then we're going to have this capability. So if we've got anyone who thinks anybody has opinions as to who should be getting these notifications, let us know, let me know, because we can send it to the sheriff, we can send it to whomever. For example, like at Johnson's, even though we know he no longer owns that, they put in some higher, a higher seawall, and we can be giving critical, we can be saying that we expect the water levels to be higher. So this is mostly an FYI to everybody, but if you've got input or you want to be part of it, let me know. Okay.
Linda, could I ask one more question here?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, of Brazaga, Michael, and I guess Bob to some degree, since he, represents South Seas. I think what the board, CEPD commissioners have to be informed of, and I'll ask this question. The vulnerability assessment that Brazaga is going to be developing, is that going to be officially and publicly made available to CEPD to use for whatever purposes that is the CEPD wishes to use in the future for future projects, future funding, or whatever they need to use it for? Or is that a question that is not yet answered until after you complete the vulnerability assessment and, present it to South Seas? So I think it's important for the CEPD commissioners to know whether the Brazaga vulnerability assessment will be basically made public and in the public domain for the full use of CEPD. If that's not going to be the case, and it could be a legitimate reason why they wouldn't want that to be the case, they may not support a project that CEPD's involved in, or they may disagree with it, or they may not want to prioritize it, or it may be that maybe some of it is proprietary because it relates to some issues at South Seas. I just don't know the answer to that. But it seems to me CEPD, to the extent that it's going to rely on Brazaga's assessment at all, has to feel completely confident that that information will be fully, can be used fully by CEPD for whatever purposes it deems appropriate. If that may not be the case, it may make sense for CEPD to have its own vulnerability assessment, totally independent assessment done by Aptum. So I don't know if, Michael, you can give us any clarity give the community any clarity on that?
What I can say is that the intent is to be able to provide all of the data in the technical memo regarding the vulnerability assessments. But at the end of the day, our client on this is South Seas. So they'll have the ability to release any additional beyond that. I'm not really able to answer that question, just because that's not my decision to make.
Right. And that makes sense to me, but it's something that I think CPD has to take into consideration.
Well, Michael, we should ask that question because, quite frankly, David, I agree with what Michael just said. Our intent has always been to produce a document that would support the community and its efforts in going forward in endeavors. Quite frankly, no one's ever asked the question directly. And so I place just a tad of hesitation to say absolutely 110% yes, because if there's something in our assessment that pertains specifically to South Seas that we don't want to disclose or don't need to disclose, we might not. So I don't know, but Michael and I can circle back and certainly ask the question.
Right. It may be something as simple that South Seas may not want the public or investors or anybody to know something early on until they've figured out how to deal with it. For example, if there's some vulnerability that for whatever reason, they don't need to publicize at this point. I'm making that up, but I'm just saying, I can imagine some things. And if that legitimate reason may be a reason enough for CEPD to want to have its own independent assessment, because they have to make governmental decisions for the island as a whole, as opposed to what's in the interest of making South Seas resilient at any given time. So
let Michael and I reach out and see if we can get absolute clarity on that. And that's a good point.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments by anyone, either commissioners?
I just wanted to follow up on David's comment. I assumed, and I shouldn't assume, but I did assume when we voted on this last week that that vulnerability assessment done by Brazzaga was going to relate to the entire of Captiva, and if South Seas had any out at all to as far as releasing any of their study, then I think we've got a problem.
Agreed.
And this probably would argue for having Brazzaga do the assessment for South Seas, and they can have that assessment and they can do with it whatever they want. But the CEPD wants its own assessment.
Right. So, okay, any other comments by anyone? Okay, Dick, I wanted to say thanks for bringing this, thanks for being upright, forthwith, and whatever, so we can talk about all of this. Thank you all for coming. And I think we're adjourned then. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.